Look at you, a man who scrubs floors daring to challenge me in court." Her voice sliced through the buzzing room as she leaned across the table, eyes glittering with contempt. "People like you should learn your place." The insults weren't whispered. They were thrown like stones, meant to bruise, meant to mark him as small. Then she spit directly into his face, a wet snap of humiliation that froze the courtroom mid-breath. The smirk she wore afterward was the final sting, a reminder that she believed no one would ever hold her accountable. He didn't flinch. He didn't even raise his voice. He simply wiped his cheek, steady as stone, the kind of composure that only grows in men who've learned to carry storms inside without warning the world. And before anyone could react, the old ceiling above them trembled, a metallic groan like an exhausted beast. Something was about to happen, something none of them were ready for. By the way, where are you watching from? Tell me in the comments below. Under the noise, beneath the rattle, the truth was shifting, because this wasn't just a petty courtroom dispute. It was the moment a man everyone overlooked finally stepped into the light. After that crack in the ceiling, after that moment when everyone else panicked, he did the opposite. The calm inside him deepened. It wasn't passivity, it was preparation. The man they called the maintenance guy, Elias, did not move the way a defeated man moves. He straightened his shoulders, wiped the spit from his jaw, and checked on the small girl beside him before anything else. His daughter clutched his sleeve, wide-eyed but trusting, because she'd seen that steadiness before. She'd leaned on it more than once. The room still buzzed with gasps and whispers. Some stared at Karen as if they couldn't believe she had gone that far. Others watched Elias, expecting him to snap, expecting him to shout, expecting him to be the kind of man she accused him of being. But he didn't give them rage, he gave them restraint. That was always the surprise with him, how he held his power back instead of throwing it around. He crouched beside his daughter, whispering something soft enough that only she could hear. Her breathing slowed, her small hand loosened. Whatever storm roared through the courtroom didn't reach her, not while he knelt there, not while he placed her safety above his pride. It was a thing people rarely noticed, that fierce softness he carried, the kind forged in long nights, hospital visits, and quiet promises. He never said out loud, but Karen noticed. For the first time, her confidence wavered. She'd expected a man who would crumble under the weight of embarrassment. Instead, she found someone hard to break. The courtroom tables, the judge's bench, the buzz of fluorescent lights, they all faded behind the growing tension between them. She tried to smirk again, but it faltered around the edges. Judge Cortez called for order. Voice, sharp, trying to regain control. Papers rustled. The bailiff moved closer, but the damage was already done. Everyone had seen it. The spit, the cruelty, the way Elias never lost control. The very moment meant to belittle him had turned into a silent indictment of her character. Elias rose slowly, guiding his daughter into her seat. His hand brushed the old wrench on his keychain, the one he kept out of habit more than need. A relic of another life, another version of himself he rarely let anyone glimpse. The courtroom didn't know what that small gesture meant. They didn't know the man behind the uniform who fixed the courthouse pipes. Not yet. What mattered now was the hearing continuing. The judge cleared her throat and reopened the file, pretending the moment hadn't rattled the entire room. Karen crossed her arms, lifting her chin as though she still held all the power. Yet the shifting gaze of the audience told another story. Something in the balance had moved, quietly but undeniably. The ceiling groaned again, faint but real this time, and Elias's eyes flicked upward. He recognized the sound immediately. Stress. Pressure. A system failing behind old walls no one else ever bothered to think about. His breath slowed, his mind sharpened. Lily leaned into him instinctively. She didn't know what he heard, but she trusted how his body changed when danger whispered. Karen kept talking, dismissing him again, rattling off accusations that barely mattered anymore. She thought the hearing was still hers to control. She thought the worst thing in the room was a man she believed she could walk over. But the real danger wasn't her voice. It was what was happening above their heads. And as the vibration deepened, the first threads of the coming crisis quietly pulled the room toward disaster. The vibration in the ceiling deepened, a low, metallic hum that threaded through the courtroom like an uninvited warning. People shifted in their seats, glancing upward, but no one reacted with urgency. Only Elias recognized the tremor for what it was. He didn't panic, didn't rush. He simply lowered his hand to steady Lily, who instinctively gripped his arm tighter. Karen kept talking, her voice sharp with manufactured authority, completely unaware of how close the building was to buckling under hidden strain. Judge Cortez paused mid-sentence, glancing up. "Is that construction again?" she muttered, irritation edging her voice. She waved toward the bailiff. "Check with maintenance after this. We'll proceed." Her words skimmed over Elias with unintentional irony, as if the man who understood the danger better than anyone was invisible in the very room he kept running. Karen leaned back in her chair, smoothing her blouse with a smug gesture that attempted to reclaim the power slipping from her grasp. "Your Honor," she said, voice dripping with disdain, "these little noises always happen. Old building, poor maintenance." Her eyes cut toward Elias, inviting the room to laugh with her. But the crowd wasn't laughing. A few people stared at her with discomfort. The earlier spit still hung in the air, like a bad taste the room couldn't swallow. Elias didn't respond. His gaze remained on the ceiling, following the direction of the pressure line he'd inspected weeks earlier. It shouldn't be active today. It shouldn't be stressed at all, which meant something else was happening, something deeper in the building's infrastructure. He took a quiet breath, storing the information, preparing without drawing attention. Lily tugged his sleeve, whispering, "Daddy, is the roof okay?" He knelt slightly, shifting to block her view of the nearest vent. "I'm right here," he whispered back. "Nothing's going to hurt you." His voice was steady, even warm. In the middle of rising tension, he made space for her safety. That was what people didn't see, the way he anchored himself around her, every decision shaped by her small, fragile world. Across the room, the clerk, a soft-spoken woman who saw everything, glanced over at them. She hesitated, then leaned toward the bailiff. "He works in maintenance here, doesn't he?" The bailiff shrugged. "Yeah, knows the building better than anyone." The clerk frowned. "Then maybe—" She stopped, unsure if she should finish the thought. But the seed was planted. Reputation had begun leaking through the room, subtle but growing. Judge Cortez shuffled the papers, adjusting her glasses with a sigh. "Ms. Drummond, your evidence contradicts itself. These timestamps don't match." Karen waved dismissively. "They must be clerical errors. The HOA board stands by the complaint." Her confidence was brittle now, cracking at the edges, but she pushed harder, refusing to lose ground. Elias watched her without anger, only clarity. He'd seen this kind of arrogance before. People who believed status protected them from consequence. People who never looked at the men who kept their world running, the ones who fixed things, cleaned things, secured things. They assumed silence meant weakness. They assumed humility meant insignificance. They didn't understand that strength is quiet because it doesn't need applause. The ceiling groaned again, a deeper, more urgent tremor. Elias felt it like a pulse under his skin. No one else reacted except Lily, who startled and clutched his arm. He exhaled slowly and shifted just enough to shield her from falling debris if it came to that. But he still didn't move for the doors, not yet. Not until he understood the source. Judge Cortez finally lifted her head. "All right, something's wrong with this room," she said sharply. "We'll take a short recess." She banged the gavel lightly. "Everyone stay calm and exit in an orderly—" A sharp pop echoed through the space, cutting her off. Gasps erupted. Dust drifted from a light fixture. Karen shot to her feet. What was that? Why isn't someone fixing this place? Her attempt to blame the room, the system, anything but herself, rang hollow. People were no longer looking at the ceiling. They were looking at her, at the woman who spit in a father's face and now panicked at the first sign of danger. Elias rose slowly, helping Lily stand. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't announce anything. He just guided her toward the nearest staff member he trusted. The same clerk who'd been watching him moments earlier. She looked startled as he approached. "Take her," he said quietly. "Stay with her until I come back." The certainty in his voice made her nod without hesitation. Karen scoffed. "Oh, please, acting like you know what you're doing. Just stay out of the way and let the real staff handle this." But her words were weak now, trembling under her fear. Elias wasn't listening. He felt the pressure shift again, traced the direction with practiced instinct, and knew exactly where he needed to go. The building wasn't failing randomly. A specific valve line was misfiring, one he'd repaired temporarily, one he'd warned about in a report that no one had read. He moved toward the service door as the crowd buzzed behind him. The clerk watched him go, whispering to the bailiff. "He's not just a maintenance guy, is he?" The bailiff shrugged again, but this time softer. Man knows things, always did. Public perception was shifting. The first real step in exposing the truth had begun. Elias slipped into the dim corridor beyond the courtroom, leaving behind the echo of Karen's collapsing confidence and stepping into the place he belonged, the space where unseen problems demanded quiet, precise action. The door clicked shut behind him, sealing off the courtroom's frantic noise, leaving Elias in the dim, narrow service corridor that ran like a hidden vein through the courthouse. The air back here carried a faint metallic tang, pressurized water mixed with old rust, and the overhead pipe shuddered again with that same deep, warning vibration. He didn't hesitate. He moved quickly, stepping over paint cans and tool crates he'd arranged neatly the week before, his mind already mapping the building's skeleton the way other people recalled old childhood streets. Behind him, muffled through the heavy door, he heard Lily's voice calling his name. It cut into his chest for a moment, slowing him just long enough to make him breathe deep. He trusted the clerk. He trusted that Lily would be safe for the next few minutes. The danger wasn't in the courtroom. It was in the walls, in the pipes, in the pressure building too fast for an old system to bear. Elias ran his hand along the warm copper line overhead. The vibration was strongest near a junction panel halfway down the corridor. He knew that panel. He'd warned about that panel, and now it was seconds away from failing. He crouched, tugging open the access hatch with the ease of a muscle memory. A burst of moist heat hit his face. Pressure was climbing, fast. A quick glance told him everything. Someone had reactivated a secondary line that wasn't meant to carry load yet. Either a contractor had misread the schedule, or someone had manually opened the wrong valve. He didn't have time to care which. The damage was coming either way. He pulled the old wrench from his belt loop, the same one he carried not because he needed it, but because it reminded him of every emergency he'd survived in places worse than this. Sandstorms, base fires, engine ruptures. He tightened his grip, repositioned the wrench on the failing valve, and prepared to override the pressure manually. But the corridor door behind him banged open again. "Hey!" Karen's shrill voice stabbed into the hallway. "What do you think you're doing back here? You don't get to run off and play hero. You started a panic and now you're hiding? Typical." Her heels clacked sharply as she stepped inside, the sound jarring in the narrow space. The bailiff tried to pull her back, but she waved him off like a fly. Elias didn't turn around. He didn't need to. Her presence filled the space like static, loud, agitated, desperate to maintain control. She kept going, voice rising as her fear twisted into hostility. "I swear, if this building falls apart because you people can't do your jobs..." She didn't finish. Another loud groan echoed above her head. Dust sifted down, catching in the harsh fluorescent light. The bailiff's voice wavered. "Ma'am, we need to leave this area. I'm not going anywhere until someone tells me why this worker is touching things he shouldn't." Her accusation bounced off the concrete walls, but it didn't hit Elias. Not really. It glanced off him the way insults had always done. People like Karen yelled when they felt reality slipping through their fingers. And right now, reality was shifting fast. "Step back," Elias said quietly, tightening the wrench another half turn. "Pressure's building." Karen scoffed. "I don't care about pressure. I care about this building falling down because of..." A piercing metallic snap cut her off. She shrieked and stumbled backward as the pipe above her buckled. The bailiff grabbed her arm, dragging her away from the falling dust. For a moment, her eyes darted wildly between Elias and the ceiling, torn between outrage and fear. He didn't look at her. He focused on the valve. Every sense sharpened. His breathing slowed. His bare hands moved with precision, honed long before anyone in this courthouse ever learned his name. He twisted the wrench, felt the resistance give way, and diverted flow toward the bypass system. The pipes groaned again, but this time, the sound softened, eased into a settling hum. The instant the pressure shifted, he knew he'd bought them time. Not much, but enough. Karen stared at him, panting, dust clinging to her expensive eye blouse. Her voice cracked when she finally managed. "How did you do that?" He still didn't answer, not to prove anything, not to appease her. He didn't owe her explanations for skills she would never respect. The bailiff stepped closer, more careful now. "Sir, should we evacuate the floor?" "Yes," Elias said simply. "Move people away from the central hall. This isn't over." Karen bristled. "You don't get to give orders." The bailiff cut her off this time. "Ma'am, he clearly knows what he's doing." That single acknowledgement shifted the hallway's energy. It wasn't praise, it wasn't recognition. It was something simpler and more powerful. Trust from someone who'd seen the danger, who'd witnessed the competence firsthand. It was the beginning of public exposure. Karen's mouth opened in outrage, but nothing came out. Her authority, so loud minutes ago, was suddenly paper thin. She looked at Elias differently now, eyes flicking to the wrench, to the valve, to the pipe that had nearly exploded above her head. He stood, wiping his hands on his shirt. "Get her out of here," he said, voice steady but not unkind. "The next rattling line is over the lobby. If it releases, it'll hit hard." The bailiff immediately ushered her toward the door. Karen resisted for 2 steps, then surrendered, still shaken by the near miss. As she disappeared around the corner, her disbelief echoed faintly. He shouldn't know any of that. He shouldn't. But he did, and soon everyone else would know it too. Elias turned deeper into the corridor, heading for the main control panel. The crisis was just beginning, and the building was about to reveal everything she didn't want to see. The corridor narrowed ahead, bending sharply toward the heart of the courthouse's mechanical network. Elias moved with purpose, each step a calculation, each breath controlled. The crisis was still unfolding, and he needed to identify the main pressure point before the entire floor turned into a hazard zone. Behind him, the echo of Karen's arguments faded as the bailiff forced her back towards safety. The moment she vanished was the moment his focus sharpened fully, the outside noise slipping from his mind like dust off steel. He reached the central junction, an aging metal cabinet with faded labels, outdated schematics, and a bypass system he'd warned management about twice. He tugged open the panel, the hinges groaning from years of neglect. Inside, the gauges flickered at dangerously high readings, the needles trembling in the red zone. The pressure wasn't just rising, it was cascading from a malfunction somewhere deeper, maybe even multiple points failing in succession. He wiped a smear of dust with his thumb and studied the numbers. "Not good," he murmured under his breath, though worry didn't touch his voice. Concern was a luxury he didn't allow himself until Lily was safe. She was with the clerk now. She was scared but protected. Knowing that gave him the clarity he needed. A distant rumble rolled through the hallway. He glanced toward the ceiling. The pipes above shook lightly, a tremor he recognized from years of crisis work, the kind that came right before a catastrophic blowout. He tightened his jaw and turned back to the panel. A manual reset wasn't going to fix this. The backup valve had already engaged, which meant something had triggered the building's aging pressure regulator. Someone must have opened a line that shouldn't have been touched. His mind immediately sorted through possibilities. Contractors, staff, a misfired update, but none of it mattered now. He adjusted 2 switches, rerouting pressure to a secondary pipe cluster that was still holding up. The building groaned again, but the shift slowed. A temporary relief. Not a solution. Footsteps approached behind him. Soft, hurried. He didn't turn right away. Only when he recognized the familiar cadence did he glance back. The clerk stood there, breathing a little too fast, but clutching Lily's backpack. "She's okay," she said before he could ask. The bailiff took her to the side exit near the security office. He nodded once. Gratitude didn't need words. It was in his eyes, in the way the tension around his shoulders eased slightly. "You need to get back to her," he said. "I came to check if you need help," she replied, surprising him. "You look like you knew exactly what to do." "I do," he said, "but this part isn't safe." Another tremor followed his statement, punctuating the warning. Dust drifted from the ceiling. The clerk flinched. "Okay," she whispered. "Just be careful." She hesitated, then added, "People are talking. They're starting to realize you're not just, well, you're more than what they thought." He didn't respond, not because he dismissed her words, but because the pipes above him trembled again, with new urgency. He motioned her toward the exit, and she hurried off, glancing back once as if memorizing the sight of him, standing in that cramped hallway, framed by flickering lights and a failing system. As soon as she disappeared, he returned to the control panel. He needed to stabilize the entire wing. That meant shutting off the compromised pressure line. But to do that, he'd have to engage the emergency override, a mechanism buried behind a rusted auxiliary plate. He crouched, wedged his wrench under the lip, and pried. The metal groaned, resisting the intrusion. He braced his foot against the wall, leaned in harder, and forced the plate open with a sharp metallic snap. Inside, the old emergency valve sat half-buried under grime. It hadn't been touched in years. It was the kind of detail no one in administration even remembered existed. He wrapped his hand around it and cranked. The valve screamed in protest, but began to move. Half turn, quarter turn, full rotation. The pressure. Gauge on the main panel flickered downward, trembling out of the red. Good. Not fixed, but no longer catastrophic. He rose, exhaling slowly. For a moment, the hallway fell still. No rattling pipes, no groaning beams. Just the hum of electricity and his own heartbeat grounding him. Then another sound broke the quiet, far off, but unmistakable. The frantic pacing of Karen's voice echoing faintly from the lobby above, growing more shrill with each passing second. Even without seeing her, Elias could picture the panic widening her eyes, the way her confidence would crumble under fear. And with that came the first real ripple of the victory strategy taking shape. Public perception shifting, witnesses questioning their assumptions, authority exposing itself without him ever lifting a finger. He wiped his hands on his shirt and stepped out of the service corridor, back toward the main hallway. A few staff members lingered near the corner, whispering urgently. When they saw him, they stiffened, not with suspicion, but attention. The bailiff approached quickly. "Sir," he said, "the judge wants an update. The whole floor's unsettled." Elias nodded once. "Pressure's redirected, but we need the central hall cleared. If the load shifts again, that ceiling's the next to go." The bailiff didn't question him. He simply turned and started barking orders, dispersing the crowd with practiced authority. Karen loomed nearby, holding her arms tightly over her chest, eyes wild. She stared at Elias like he'd walked out of a burning building untouched. "You!" she snapped, though her voice wavered. "What did you do? Why is everyone listening to you?" He didn't rise to it. "Just get outside," he said. "This floor's not stable." Her mouth opened, prepared to spit another insult, but another pipe rumbled above her, showering dust across her hair. She flinched violently, and in that flinch, in front of everyone, the power she had strutted in with shattered like brittle glass. The room saw it. Elias saw it. And the shift in the atmosphere was unmistakable. The first public crack in her authority. The moment the victory strategy truly ignited. Dust still clung to Karen's shoulders as she backed away from the trembling ceiling, her eyes darting from Elias to the bailiff, as if trying to understand how the power she'd carried into the courthouse had evaporated so quickly. People watched her the way they watched a structure losing balance, waiting for the next crack, the next slip, the next embarrassing collapse. Elias didn't linger on her fear. His attention shifted upward again, listening to the rhythm of the pipes, the way one strain quieted while another began to pulse. The danger wasn't gone. It was only shifting. Judge Cortez stepped out from behind the courtroom doors, her face tight with concern. "Is this floor safe or not?" she demanded, her voice steady but edged with the kind of frustration that comes when authority meets uncertainty. She wasn't looking at Karen. She wasn't looking at the bailiff. She was looking at Elias. The entire hallway followed her gaze, turning to him instinctively, waiting for his assessment. He wiped a smear of dust from his forearm and answered with the same calm he always carried. "It's stable for now, but the central hall needs to be cleared. The load is settling unevenly. If another line misfires, that's where it'll hit first." Judge Cortez didn't question him. "Everyone out of the central hall," she ordered immediately, pushing past Karen's sputtering protests. Staff, visitors, and board members scattered without hesitation. The bailiff moved with urgency, guiding people toward the exits. In the rising commotion, Elias noticed Lily at the far end of the hall with the clerk, her small hands gripping her backpack straps. When she spotted him, she exhaled in relief, her shoulders dropping. He gave her a small nod, subtle, but enough to reassure her that he was still in control. Karen recovered enough to find her voice again, though it lacked the bite it once had. "He's a maintenance worker," she hissed to a cluster of onlookers. Why is everyone treating him like he's some kind of expert? But instead of falling in line, the onlookers exchanged glances, uncomfortable, uncertain, questioning her judgment instead of his. That shift, that quiet turning of public perception, was exactly what she feared most. The clerk approached Elias, still holding Lily's backpack. "She's shaken, but okay," she said softly. "I kept her by the exit just in case." He nodded gratefully, his jaw tightening when another tremor rolled beneath the tiles. The clerk swallowed. "Do you need anything from me? Anything at all?" "Keep people calm," he said. "The worst thing right now is panic." Karen overheard and scoffed loudly. "Panic? The only reason people are panicking is because he keeps pretending to be something he's not." Elias didn't respond. He didn't have to. The bailiff turned toward her with clear disbelief. "Ma'am, a pipe nearly burst over your head. If he hadn't acted—" Karen held up a hand, cutting him off. No, this is ridiculous. I want a supervisor, someone actually qualified." She emphasized the last word with acidic confidence. Elias stepped closer to the service door. "Supervisor's on another floor," he said calmly. "And if they knew what was happening, they'd be doing exactly what I'm doing now." She bristled. "And what exactly is that?" "Keeping the building from collapsing," he said, not with arrogance, but with the quiet certainty of someone speaking a plain and unavoidable truth. Before Karen could fire back, a new noise erupted, sharp, metallic, and unmistakably dangerous. A pop echoed from above the central hall, followed by a hiss of pressured air escaping through a weakening joint. The crowd froze. "Judge Usi." Cortez's eyes widened. The bailiff immediately stepped toward the noise. Elias pointed toward the far corner. "Everyone move, now!" People scattered, pushing away from the hall just as a sprinkler head snapped clean off, spraying a high-pressure jet of water across the floor. Panic surged again. The bailiff shielded a mother and her son from the spray while ushering them back toward the exit. Karen shrieked and stumbled backward, slipping on the wet tile. She barely caught herself against the wall, her outrage slipping into raw fear. "Do something! Somebody do something!" she cried. Elias didn't waste time. He moved through the chaos like someone trained for it, stepping around puddles, guiding people towards safety, assessing the water pressure, calculating the line's path with every step. The pipe feeding the sprinkler was part of the same compromised system he'd just stabilized. This rupture meant the load was shifting again, and badly. The bailiff caught up to him. "What now?" Elias studied the water pressure, the angle of the spray, the vibration running through the wall. "There's a junction above the central hall ceiling. If the pressure reaches that panel, the whole section could drop." The bailiff nodded, trusting every word. "Tell me what to do." "Clear everyone out," Elias said. "I'll handle the panel." Karen staggered toward them, drenched, furious, and terrified. "You can't just go running around this building like you own it." He didn't even look at her. "Ma'am, get outside." Her mouth opened, a fresh insult ready. But another burst of water hissed overhead, sending her scrambling away with a scream. For the first time, the courtroom audience saw her without the armor of authority, just a person drowning in her own fragility. And they saw Elias as the opposite. As he moved back toward the service corridor, several staff members exchanged whispers. He knew it was coming. He saved the courtroom. He's not just maintenance. Reputation leaked through the building like a quiet tide, shifting the story before Karen could reclaim it. Elias wiped the water from his brow, listening carefully as he stepped through the service door again. The pipes groaned, the walls trembled, and the crisis tightened like a fist around the courthouse. The building wasn't finished testing him yet. The service door thudded shut behind him, sealing out the shrieks, splashing water, and Karen's unraveling voice. In the dim corridor, the world tightened into metal, pressure, and instinct. Elias moved deeper, following the tremors running through the courthouse like a distressed heartbeat. Every vibration, every hiss, every tense groan painted a clear map in his mind. This wing was seconds from cascading a failure. He didn't run. He didn't have to. His pace was steady, deliberate, the practiced stride of someone who had once moved through burning outposts and collapsing structures with the same controlled urgency. The main control panel flickered when he reached it, its light sputtering like an old lantern fighting wind. Water dripped from a connection overhead, a thin but dangerous sign that Pressure had begun creeping into auxiliary lines. He pulled the wrench from his belt loop and examined the readings on the gauges. The pressure was climbing along the central hall line, heavier and faster than before. Redirecting the earlier surge had only delayed the inevitable. Now, the building demanded a full manual override, and the only way to reach the override was through the upper maintenance hatch, a cramped, forgotten space most workers avoided because of the low beams and rusted supports. He tightened his grip on the wrench and stepped toward the ladder welded into the corner. As he climbed, the heat from the pipes warmed the metal rungs beneath his palms. At the top, he forced open the hatch. A wave of humid air hit him full force. The bypass grid loomed above, the maze of old pipes tangled like stubborn roots. He crawled inside, careful not to jostle the weakest lines. The older systems creaked under his weight, each sound reminding him how much the building relied on patchwork fixes and overlooked maintenance. Midway across the cramped space, another tremor rolled through, stronger this time. The beam above him vibrated, sending rust flakes drifting down. Elias paused, bracing himself, breathing evenly. He had been here before, not in this building, but in this moment. The sweat, the heat, the danger pressing in from all sides, the responsibility of being the only person between collapse and safety. He carried it the way others carry their own heartbeat. Below him, muffled voices echoed through vents, shouts, hurried footsteps, someone crying, someone arguing. He recognized Karen's voice even through the metal. She was demanding someone take control, her panic growing sharper with each second she remained powerless. But the wider group wasn't listening to her. The authority she walked in with had dissolved in the spray of a broken sprinkler head. He reached the main bypass. The pressure gauge oscillated violently, needle trembling at the edge of the red. If the pressure reached maximum, the central hall ceiling would fail, unleashing a flood behind the drywall. People could be trapped, injured, worse. He wiped his forehead and leaned in, wrench poised. "All right," he muttered to the pipes, as if speaking to something wild but familiar. "Let's do this." The first turn required force. He braced both feet against a metal support beam, twisted the wrench, and felt the valve groan awake under his strength. The next turn was harder, sticky from years of inactivity. Sweat slid down his temple as he gritted his teeth, gripping the wrench with both hands. A final push cracked the valve loose with a metallic shriek. The pipes vibrated violently, and then the pressure gauge steadied. Not perfect, but stabilizing. He exhaled, muscles loosening slightly. He kept adjusting smaller valves, redistributing load across the grid the way he would have in the field, controlling the flow with precision most people didn't even realize he possessed. Every movement was efficient, grounded, familiar. A sudden thud echoed from below. Someone had slammed a door. Then came the frantic voice of the bailiff, traveling upward through the vent. "Everyone, stay clear. He's stabilizing it." A wave of murmurs followed, disbelief tangled with awe. Elias paused mid-turn. They were talking about him, publicly, loudly. The shift had begun. The public exposure victory strategy was unfolding almost effortlessly, not through anything he announced, but through what witnesses saw with their own eyes. Karen's panicked voice pierced through next. "Stabilizing? He's not supposed to be doing any of this. This is illegal. Where's the judge? Someone stop him before he breaks everything." He shook his head, turning the last valve with the patience of someone who had heard desperation in far harsher forms. Her voice faded as another tremor rattled the beams above him, followed by a release of pressure that shook the entire panel. He braced himself, pressing one hand flat against a pipe until the vibration eased again. When the system finally settled, the stillness was deafening. He lay there for a moment, letting his breath return to normal, feeling the building's heartbeat slow under him. Then he crawled back to the hatch, slid down the ladder, and stepped into the corridor again. The bailiff waited at the end of the hall, eyes wide with respect. "Is it handled?" "For now," Elias said. "The central hall's safe to move past, but the judge needs to redirect everyone outside." The bailiff nodded quickly. "I'll tell her." As he rushed off, the clerk appeared from behind a pillar, holding Lily's backpack again. "She keeps asking for you," she said. "She saw the water burst and thought, well, she thought you were under it." Elias's chest tightened. "Thank you," he said softly. "I'll go to her now." Karen's voice rose again from the crowd beyond, a panicked, cracking sound. "This is unacceptable! Someone stop him! He's pretending to be—" But her words faded into insignificance as Elias stepped past the doorway, the crisis momentarily contained. His calm competence overshadowed her collapsing authority in every eye that watched him, and the courthouse had only begun to uncover who he really was. Elias stepped out of the service corridor and into the wider hallway, where the chaotic energy had thinned into nervous murmurs and scattered clusters of people clinging to the walls. The air still held a faint mist from the ruptured sprinkler, glistening on the tiles, but the worst of the danger had passed. The bailiff was ushering the last of the group toward the stairwell when Lily spotted her father and broke into a run. She collided into him with a small, trembling force, wrapping her arms around his waist. He knelt immediately, steadying her with both hands. "I'm okay," he whispered, brushing damp hair from her forehead. "You did everything right." She nodded into his chest, clinging to the reassurance in his voice. The clerk hovered behind her, relief softening her face. "She refused to go outside until she saw you," she said quietly. "I tried, but—" "It's fine," Elias said. "Thank you. I'm taking her out now." Before he could stand, the hallway lights flickered again. A warning, not a failure. A reminder that the building hadn't fully recovered. Elias rose to his feet, holding Lily's hand. His eyes traveled upward, toward the ceiling, toward the direction of the next pressure line. He could sense where the stress had traveled. It wasn't over, not yet. Karen's voice cut through the tension like glass dragged across tile. "This is absurd! Why is he still here? Why isn't someone in charge taking control?" She was standing near the far end of the hall, her clothes damp, her hair sticking to one side of her face, her carefully curated composure shattered. She pointed at Elias with a shaking hand. "He's the reason this building is falling apart." The crowd reacted instantly, not with agreement, but with subtle recoil. Even those who had once smirked at her superiority glanced at her now with discomfort. It was one thing to hold authority. It was another to unravel publicly in front of an entire courthouse. Elias didn't slow down. He guided Lily toward the exit and past Karen without a word. That silence infuriated her more than any argument could have. "Don't you walk away from me," she snarled. "Answer me." He paused, not for her, but for Lily, who flinched at the sharpness in the woman's voice. He turned just enough to shield his daughter behind him, his posture calm but immovable. "Move to the exit," he said, not loudly, not aggressively, but with the quiet authority of someone who understood exactly what needed to be done. Karen stared at him, stunned that he would direct her again. You can't order people around." The bailiff stepped between them before Elias had to respond. "Ma'am, please go outside," he said firmly. "The judge is asking for you." That stunned her into silence long enough for Elias to guide Lily past the security desk. The clerk followed, hovering protectively. The hallway dimmed briefly from another flicker, and the building groaned again, though softly this time. Elias glanced over his shoulder, reading the shift in the structure like lines on a map. The danger zone had moved deeper into the administrative wing. The threat wasn't heading toward the people. It was heading toward the judge's chambers. He didn't have time to think about the irony that the place where authority lived was now the most vulnerable. As he helped Lily down the first step of the stairwell, the bailiff's voice rose above the commotion. "Ward!" Elias looked back. The bailiff jogged toward him. "Judge Cortez wants you. She says you need to brief her now. She's calling emergency protocol." Elias exhaled slowly. He'd hoped he could get Lily outside before the building demanded more of him. But stability didn't care about timing. It only cared about the next potential failure. He crouched and held Lily's arms lightly. "I need you to go outside now," he said gently. "The clerk will stay with you. I'll be right behind you." Her eyes filled with fear. "Daddy, no." "I promise," he said softly. "I'm not going far. Just outside this hallway. You can see the door from the steps." The clerk nodded and reached for Lily's hand. After a moment's hesitation, Lily let go of her father. Fear flickered across her face, but she trusted him. Always had, always would. Elias stood again, watching them descend until they were out of sight. Then he turned and moved back toward the judge's office with the bailiff. Karen followed from a distance, too rattled to approach, but too obsessed to stay away. "This is a disaster," she muttered to the board members who remained near her. He's making it worse. He shouldn't even be here. He shouldn't. But the murmurs she expected didn't follow. Instead, a soft voice from one of the board members whispered, "He saved us in that courtroom." Another added, "I saw him shut down the valve. He knew exactly what to do." The tide was shifting, and she felt it, slipping like sand between her fingers. They reached Judge Cortez just as a new vibration tremored through the wall beside her office. Elias glanced at the drywall, noting the faint bulge indicating pressure behind the panel. Judge Cortez looked shaken now, less a figure of authority, and more a person recognizing danger she couldn't resolve without help. "Can you stop this?" she asked, breath tight. "Yes," Elias replied, "but I need access to the control room behind your chambers." "It's locked," she said. "Only senior staff." He didn't need to finish his sentence. She saw it in his eyes. "Fine," she said. "Go." Karen sputtered. "You're letting him into the judge's chambers? He's a maintenance worker." Judge Cortez shot her a glare sharp enough to silence the entire hallway. "He's the only one who understands what this building is doing. Unless you'd like the ceiling to come down on your head, step aside." The shift was complete. Authority no longer answered Karen. It answered Elias, and with that, he stepped into the judge's corridor, the courthouse trembling as if acknowledging the man who now held it together. The judge's corridor felt different the moment Elias stepped into it. Quieter, heavier, the air thick with authority, and the weight of decisions usually made far from public eyes. The carpeting muffled the sound of his boots, but the subtle tremor beneath the floorboards told the truth. The administrative wing was under strain. Judge Cortez moved quickly beside him, unlocking the restricted door with trembling hands. Karen trailed several steps behind, flanked by two board members who whispered nervously, but didn't dare get too close. Elias paused at the threshold of the chamber hallway. He scanned the walls, tracing the path of the pressure lines hidden behind layers of plaster and paint. The vibration pulsing through the structure was sharper here, concentrated. He took a breath, measuring the cadence, mapping the load shift with an engineer's intuition honed through years of crisis work. The worst of the pressure was clustered around the judge's private office, the exact room Karen had once bragged about, influencing through her connections. "You said the control room is behind my office?" Judge Cortez asked, her voice tight. "Yes," Elias answered. "That's where the main regulator ties into the older system. If that line bursts, this whole wing could flood." Karen gasped. "Flood? This is outrageous. That can't happen. These buildings don't just flood." Elias didn't look at her. They do when contractors override safety valves to cut corners. "Are you suggesting incompetence?" she snapped, indignant even in fear. "I'm stating physics," he replied, already moving forward. He reached the judge's office door. Judge Cortez unlocked it and stepped aside. The room inside was neat, orderly, lined with shelves of casebooks and framed certificates. But Elias wasn't looking at the decor. His attention went straight to the faint bulge in the back wall, the hairline crack just beginning to form above the bookshelf. He crossed the room, dragging a chair aside as he approached the panel. Karen hovered at the doorway, her earlier bravado replaced by anxious pacing. "I don't understand why everyone is letting him do this. He's not staff. He's not trained. He's the reason we're all still standing here," the bailiff interrupted, arriving with two more staff members behind him. Karen froze, stunned at being openly contradicted. The board members beside her shifted uncomfortably, each of them aware that the tide had turned fully against her. Elias crouched and brushed dust from the panel's edge. The pressure behind it was high, too high. The building had been whispering danger all morning, and now it was raising its voice. He reached for the old army wrench hanging from his belt. It felt solid in his palm, warm from use, familiar. He slid the wrench under the panel edge and pried gently. The metal protested, groaning as it bent. Dust spilled out, followed by a thin mist of water. The pressure was seconds away from pushing through the wall. "Step back," he said quietly. Judge Cortez obeyed immediately. The bailiff moved the remaining staff backward. Karen hesitated, then scurried behind the group when the wall gave another ominous creak. Elias inhaled, braced his legs, and forced the panel open with a sharp crack. Water sprayed out in a thin arc, hitting the far side of the office. The group gasped. Karen screamed. But Elias didn't back away. He angled his body, stepped into the spray, and located the emergency bypass line inside the cavity. A rusted valve sat wedged between two pipes. He turned the wrench onto it and pressed down. The metal resisted, stiff from years of inactivity. He adjusted his grip, leaning his weight into it. Come on, he thought, feeling the metal's stubborn refusal. Another tremor shook the room. A second spray burst through the crack. Karen shrieked again, stumbling backward. Elias tightened his jaw, grit his teeth, and forced the wrench down. This time, the valve screamed, shuddered, then gave way with a sudden lurch. The pressure shifted instantly, the spray narrowing. He twisted the valve again, redirecting the flow into the secondary line he'd stabilized earlier. The sound changed, less violent, more controlled. He exhaled, shoulders lowering. It wasn't fixed, but it wasn't seconds from rupture anymore. Slowly, the tremors through the floor eased. The building steadied beneath them. The air felt different in the chamber, lighter, safer. Judge Cortez's voice broke the silence. You really do understand this building better than anyone." Elias wiped his hands on his shirt. "I just listen when it talks." The clerk, who had reappeared near the doorway, whispered to the bailiff, "Did you see that? He didn't even hesitate." Whispers ripple spread through the crowd. "He saved the office. He knew exactly what to do. He's not just maintenance." Reputation wasn't leaking anymore. It was flooding the hallways, reshaping the narrative with each passing second. Karen, drenched and pale, tried to speak. This is absurd. We can't just trust him with—" Judge Cortez turned sharply. "Trust him? He's the reason this floor is still intact. Unless you want to explain to the district supervisor why you interfered with a man preventing structural collapse, I suggest you stay quiet." Karen's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. No words came out. Elias stepped back from the wall, glancing once more at the pressure gauge inside the cavity. Stable, for now. But the system needed a final stabilizer from the main emergency panel deeper in the building. He turned to the bailiff. "I need to get to the central control room. That's the last link." "Then let's go," the bailiff said immediately, but the judge held up a hand. "Before you leave, your daughter is safe. The clerk is outside with her. Your wife is on the way." Her voice softened. She was already in the building when the alarms went off. Karen blinked, confused. "Your wife?" Elias didn't answer. He simply headed for the hallway, wrench in hand, the courthouse settling around him like a beast calmed by the only handler it trusted. This crisis wasn't finished yet. He left the judge's office with the wrench hanging loosely at his side, boots splashing through thin puddles left by the ruptured line. The administrative wing trembled faintly, but the violent, dangerous surges had settled into a quieter rhythm. Elias could feel the building breathing again, still strained, still wounded, but no longer seconds from catastrophe. The bailiff kept pace beside him, matching his stride without trying to lead. The shift in authority wasn't spoken aloud. It didn't need to be. Everyone in that hallway had seen what competence looked like, and it wasn't dressed in expensive clothes or wielding HOA titles. They rounded the corner toward the central control room, a restricted space tucked behind a locked fire door. Elias stopped in front of it, running his hand along the frame. The building's internal pulse hummed here more than anywhere, vibrating in the metal. This was the heart of the system. Fixing it would stabilize the entire wing. Behind them, muffled footsteps signaled someone approaching. The bailiff stiffened. Elias didn't need to turn to know who it was. Karen's voice reached them before she did, shaky but determined to reclaim something, anything, of her slipping power. "Where is she?" she demanded. "You said his wife is in the building. Why would a judge even be anywhere near this chaos?" Judge Cortez appeared behind Karen, expression carved from stone. "She wasn't scheduled to preside today. She's conducting an internal review and came early for a meeting. She's been moved to a safe location until this is resolved." Karen's face twitched. "Safe location? Why him? Why does everyone just defer to him?" The bailiff didn't answer. Neither did Elias. He inserted the emergency master key into the lock, waiting for the moment it clicked. Karen's frustration flared hotter. "He's a maintenance tech. A maintenance tech should not be inside a restricted control room. I'll be filing a report with—" "Ma'am," the bailiff cut in, voice steady but firm. "With all due respect, if you file anything today, it should be a thank you note." Several staff members nearby stopped to listen. Karen flushed. Before she could summon a retort, the lock clicked open. Elias pushed the heavy door inward, revealing the dim, cramped control room. The walls were packed with old regulators, pressure junctions, electrical panels, and decades-old wiring. A low alarm beeped steadily from one of the consoles. A warning, not an emergency. The room carried the warm, metallic smell of machinery stressed too long. He stepped inside, assessing the gauges. The system was stabilizing, but only because the earlier bypasses had relieved some of the pressure. The main regulator, however, was still partially jammed. It needed full manual reset, a risky step, but the only step that would prevent another cascading failure. The bailiff lingered at the door. "How bad is it?" "Still vulnerable," Elias said. "If the regulator fails, the pressure could hit the lower wing next. And that means basement flooding, archive damage, electrical hazards." The bailiff whistled under his breath. "So no, we don't want that." "No," Elias agreed. Karen snorted sharply. "This is ridiculous. This entire place is run by incompetence. And now you're letting a janitor—" The word snapped through the air like a whip. Elias straightened. He didn't turn, but his voice carried a weight that silenced the room. "I'm not a janitor." For a moment, the hallway behind him went still. The bailiff eyed Karen. "You might stop talking now." Karen opened her mouth, then froze as the lights flickered again. The building let out a low groan, and a tremor ran under their feet. Elias moved instantly, adjusting the regulator's lower valve. He felt the vibration ease, the system settling under his touch. Only then did he speak again. "I need the central line shut down for 30 seconds. No one can turn anything on, off, or adjust any digital controls during that time." Judge Cortez nodded. "I'll make sure everyone knows." She stepped into the hallway to alert staff. Karen followed, still too shaken to argue, but too proud to stay silent. "This is chaos," she spat. "You're all taking orders from someone who cleans pipes." The clerk, who had quietly rejoined the group, spoke up for the first time. "He saved my life in that courtroom. What exactly did you do?" Karen's mouth snapped shut. The public exposure strategy was no longer a strategy. It was happening naturally, through the mouths of witnesses who had seen the truth with their own eyes. Elias positioned the wrench onto the regulator's main latch. Rust resisted him immediately. This valve hadn't been touched in years, maybe decades. He braced his legs, pushed, and felt the latch shift a fraction of an inch. Another push. Another inch. A sharp ping echoed as the latch finally snapped into place, releasing the pressure in a controlled surge that shook the panel but didn't rupture it. The lights flickered once, then steadied. The alarm beep slowed before stopping entirely. The building settled, really settled. The tremors faded into silence. The bailiff exhaled. "Is that it?" "For today," Elias said. The clerk stepped forward. "The crowd outside, they're talking about you. They're saying you held this whole building together." He didn't react to the praise. He had never needed it. Karen, pale and stiff, tried to recover her voice. "Well, he's still not a professional. This doesn't change." Judge Cortez walked back in, expression sharper now. "You assaulted a man in my courtroom, and he is the reason my chambers didn't collapse." She gestured to the hallway. "You may want to reflect on who you've been speaking to." Karen's face blanched. Elias closed the panel quietly and turned toward the door. "I need to check on my daughter." No one stopped him. They only stepped aside. The public's perception had flipped. Karen's influence was crumbling piece by piece, and Elias, without meaning to, had become the calm center of the storm. He stepped out of the control room and into a hallway that felt entirely different from the one he'd entered minutes ago. The tremors had faded, the lights steadied. The building exhaled a long, exhausted breath, settling like a creature finally soothed. Conversations quieted as Elias walked through the corridor, wrench still in hand, shirt damp from water spray and streaked with dust. Staff members who had barely noticed him an hour earlier now made space for him without being asked. They watched him with something new in their eyes, respect, gratitude, awe. He didn't look for any of it. He only looked for Lily. The clerk spotted him first. She hurried toward him near the stairwell, still holding Lily's small backpack like a lifeline. "She's outside with the deputy," she said, still shaken, but safe. Relief washed through him in a slow, steady wave. He nodded, already moving toward the exit. But as he reached the end of the hallway, the door swung open and a figure stepped inside. A woman in judicial robes. A woman with dark hair pinned back in the style she always used for serious days. A woman who froze when she saw him. Judge Mara Ward, his wife, his almost former wife, his still-in-his-heart wife. The hallway went silent in an instant. Every pair of eyes shifted between them, recognizing something even before the details made sense. Even Karen, who had been lurking behind a cluster of staff members, went still, her face tightening into a confused squint. Mara's gaze swept over him, his soaked shirt, the dust on his arms, the wrench still dangling from his hand. Her breath caught. "Elias?" she whispered, voice cracking despite the authority she carried effortlessly. He hadn't seen her in weeks. Their separation had been gentle, purposeful, built around Lily's health and the distance Mara believed she needed to protect all of them from the toll of stress. They co-parented. They communicated. But they hadn't stood this close since they agreed to give each other space. And here they were, in the middle of a courthouse emergency, surrounded by people who had no idea the quiet maintenance man was married to a district judge. Mara took a step toward him, emotion tightening her features. "Are you hurt?" He shook his head. "I'm fine. It was just the pressure system's failing." Judge Cortez stepped forward, relief splashing across her face. "Thank God you're here. Your husband has been—" Karen lurched out from behind the staff. "Husband!" The word cracked through the hallway like a dropped glass. All eyes snapped to her. She pointed at Elias, sputtering. "Him? He's married to a judge? That's impossible. He's—" The bailiff stepped closer, arms folded. "Say the word janitor again, I dare you." Karen's mouth clamped shut. Mara blinked, realization dawning. "What is going on?" Judge Cortez gestured around them. "He prevented a catastrophic failure, twice. This building could have been a disaster zone right now, if not for him." Mara's eyes softened more. Pride flickered through them, real, unguarded pride. "Of course he did," she murmured, almost to herself. Elias shifted, uncomfortable with the growing attention. "I still need to get Lily outside." "Already taken care of," Mara said, stepping closer. "She's with the sheriff's deputy near the entrance. They radioed me when I arrived. She's worried about you." He exhaled slowly. "Then I should—" "Not before someone explains what happened," Karen snapped, desperate to reclaim anything. "This is completely inappropriate. A judge shouldn't be involved with a case where what?" Mara asked, turning toward her with the full force of judicial authority. "Where my husband was assaulted? Where he saved a courthouse full of people while you were screaming at everyone?" Karen paled. I didn't know. That doesn't change what you did," Judge Cortez said firmly. "You spat on him in open court. That's an assault charge, Ms. Drummond." The hallway gasped collectively. Karen staggered back. No, it wasn't. That's being exaggerated. He provoked—" Elias spoke quietly from behind them. "I didn't say a word." The room knew it was true. The clerk stepped forward. "I saw it happen. So did half the court. And the security cameras saw the rest," the bailiff added, arms crossed. Karen's face crumpled as her power evaporated entirely. Mara turned back to Elias, her voice softening again. "You always step toward danger instead of away from it." He shrugged lightly. "Old habits." Her eyes glistened, barely visible, but there. "I forget sometimes what you used to be." Karen's voice cracked in panic. "Used to be? What does that even mean?" Judge Cortez answered before Elias could. "He's former Army combat engineer, bomb disposal, crisis response, the kind of person people call when everything else is falling apart." The words dropped into the hallway like thunder. Karen's lips parted, shock overtaking her expression, her eyes darting between Elias and the two judges. She looked like someone watching her version of reality crumble around her. Elias shifted uncomfortably. "Look, I don't want to make a scene." Mara stepped closer and touched his arm lightly. An anchor, a tether. "You didn't make anything. You just revealed the truth." Before anyone could speak again, a radio crackled from the bailiff's belt. "Control room stable. All pressure readings normal." Elias nodded. The crisis was over. Mara exhaled in visible relief. Let's go see our daughter. Behind them, Karen finally found her voice again. But it wasn't strong. It wasn't confident. It wasn't powerful. It was terrified, and everyone saw it. They moved together toward the courthouse entrance, the tension in the air shifting from urgent crisis to stunned disbelief. Staff members clustered along the hallway, murmuring to each other as Elias and Judge Mara Ward walked side by side. It wasn't a triumphant march or a dramatic announcement. It was quiet, human, real, the way truth often reveals itself, without fanfare, but undeniable. Mara's hand hovered near his arm, not quite touching, but close enough to show a connection no one had seen before. For the first time all morning, Elias allowed himself to breathe fully, the weight of the crisis fading enough for something softer to surface. Lily spotted him before he saw her. She broke free from the deputy's side and sprinted toward him, wrapping her arms around his legs. He scooped her up without hesitation, holding her close, kissing the top of her head as she clung to him. "Daddy," she whispered, her voice trembling, "I thought you were under the water. I thought—" "I'm here," he murmured. "I'm okay. You're safe." Mara stepped beside them, her expression warm, protective. "She was brave," she said softly. "Didn't want to leave the building until someone told her you were out." Lily leaned toward Mara, relief settling into her posture. "Mom?" she whispered. Mara smiled gently, brushing a loose strand of hair from Lily's face. The three of them stood like that for a moment, a small, unbroken circle in a hallway full of people who suddenly didn't know where to look. Behind them, however, Karen's presence refused to stay silent. She stormed out of the stairwell, her clothes damp, her hair disheveled, her expression wild. The board members trailed after her reluctantly, clearly uncomfortable being associated with the spectacle she had become. "This is unbelievable," she screeched, pointing toward Elias. "You people are acting like he saved the building." "He did save the building," the bailiff said bluntly. "Twice." Karen's eyes widened. "You're all exaggerating. He endangered us. He's not even authorized to—" Judge Cortez appeared from the hallway behind her, holding a tablet with a grainy freeze frame of security footage displayed on it. In the image, Karen's hand was mid-swing toward Elias's face, her fingers curled, her expression twisted with fury. The next frame captured the spit leaving her lips. "Ms. Drummond," Judge Cortez said, voice sharp enough to silence the crowd. "This footage speaks for itself." Karen froze, her mouth hanging open. Mara stepped forward, her robe sweeping behind her like a dark wave. "What you did wasn't an outburst," she said evenly. "It was an assault, recorded in a courtroom, committed in front of witnesses and on-duty officers." Karen stammered. I was provoked. He stood still," the clerk said quietly from the back of the group. "He said nothing. He didn't even look angry." Another staff member added, "He was calming his daughter, and you attacked him." Karen's panic bloomed across her face. No, this is all being twisted. I didn't know who he was." "That," Mara said softly, "is the problem." Silence swept the lobby. Everyone could feel it, the shift, the reckoning, the moment when power finally faced the consequences it believed it would never meet. The bailiff stepped forward. "Ms. Drummond, you are being detained for assault inside a courthouse and for willfully endangering others by interfering during an emergency evacuation." He reached for her wrist gently, professionally, but firmly. Karen jerked back. "You can't detain me. I'm on the HOA board. I know people." Elias didn't speak. He simply stood beside Lily and Mara, watching the unraveling of a woman who had walked into the building, certain she controlled the room. But now, the room didn't belong to her. It belonged to the truth she spent so long skating around. The bailiff gave her a final chance. "Ma'am, please don't resist." Karen's panic spilled over. "He's lying. They're lying. All of this is—" "Enough," Mara said, her voice slicing through the chaos. She stepped closer, her presence commanding the entire lobby. "You chose to spit on a father in front of his child. You chose to scream while he prevented an infrastructure collapse. You chose cruelty when all he showed was restraint." Her gaze hardened. "Now you're choosing denial. Those choices define you, not your title." Karen's expression broke, fear cracking through arrogance. disbelief crumbling into transparent desperation. She looked around the lobby, searching for someone to side with her, but everyone she turned to stepped back. No allies remained. The bailiff gently took her wrist, guided her hands behind her, and secured the cuffs. Karen sagged, her voice reduced to a whimper. "This isn't fair," she muttered. "I didn't know who he was." Judge Cortez lifted the tablet again. "You didn't need to know who he was to treat him like a human being." Those words silenced even the murmurs. Elias shifted Lily onto his hip, his eyes meeting Mara's briefly. She held his gaze with something deeper than relief. Recognition, respect, maybe even the first spark of the connection they both feared had faded. "Let's get her home," Mara said gently, nodding toward Lily. He nodded. The crowd parted for them without needing to be asked. As they walked toward the exit, people whispered again, but now with admiration instead of assumptions. The maintenance man they ignored had held up the building. The judge they respected stood beside him, and Karen Drummond, once so loud, so certain, so untouchable, was led away in handcuffs, her influence unraveling behind her like threads pulled from a fraying fabric. Elias stepped into the sunlight with his daughter and wife beside him. Karen's downfall was no longer a matter of opinion. It was recorded, witnessed, undeniable. The sunlight outside the courthouse hit them with the kind of warmth that felt almost unreal after the chaos inside. Elias adjusted Lily on his hip, her small arms wrapped tight around his neck, unwilling to let go. Mara walked beside them, her steps steady, her expression softer than it had been in months. The crowd spilled out behind them, still murmuring about everything they had witnessed: the failed pipes, the emergency, the revelations, and the woman being led away by deputies. The courthouse that had once overlooked Elias now seemed to tilt toward him, recognizing the quiet force that had held it upright when it mattered most. They reached a bench beneath a tree. Elias sat, letting Lily curl into his side. Mara remained standing for a moment, watching him with a thoughtful stillness. "I forgot how you do that," she said quietly. He looked up. "Do what?" "Step into chaos like it's nothing. Keep everyone calm just by being there." Her eyes softened. "I used to see that every day." He didn't answer right away. His fingers brushed through Lily's hair, grounding him. "It's not something I think about," he said finally. "Just what needs to be done." Mara exhaled, sinking onto the bench beside him. "I shouldn't be surprised," she murmured. "But seeing it again, seeing how people look to you, it reminded me." He didn't need her to finish. He knew what she meant. The years they'd shared before Lily's health scare, before the separation they both agreed on for the sake of reducing stress. The years when Mara relied on his steadiness as much as he had relied on her strength. The clerk approached with a hesitant smile. "The judge asked me to check in on all three of you," she said warmly. She said, "Take as long as you need." Elias nodded gratefully. The clerk leaned closer. "For what it's worth, everyone inside knows what you did. They won't forget it." Lily looked up at that, her voice small. "Daddy, were you scared?" He kissed her temple. "Of course. Being brave doesn't mean you're not scared. It just means you keep going anyway." Mara smiled softly. "He's always done that." They sat in silence for a long moment. Then the bailiff stepped outside, looking relieved. He approached them with a respectful nod. "The building's fully stable now. Engineers are on their way to inspect it. And Ms. Drummond has been transported to the precinct for processing." Lily lifted her head at the name. "Is she the lady who yelled at you?" Mara answered, gently. "She made bad choices today. Grown-ups aren't supposed to act like that." "Will she be in trouble?" Lily asked. Elias met Mara's eyes. Mara answered with the calm wisdom she carried naturally. "She'll face the consequences of what she did. People always do, eventually." The bailiff cleared his throat. Judge Cortez mentioned that the prosecutor might pursue charges. And the footage, well, it's pretty clear. He hesitated. "You want me to send over a copy of the incident report?" Elias nodded. "Thank you." The bailiff stepped away, leaving the small family in peace. Karen's downfall was fully in motion, not because Elias had demanded it, but because the truth had been undeniable in public view. That was the heart of the victory strategy, the one he never asked for but had earned through quiet, unwavering actions. Mara rested a hand on the bench, inches from his. "You should know something. she said softly. When the alarms went off and I was told there was a maintenance tech risking his life to hold the building together, I already knew it was you. He looked at her. Her eyes were warm, sincere. How? Because you always run toward the danger, she said, and because there's no one else I'd trust with this building, or our daughter. Emotion flickered in his chest, dangerous, hopeful. He didn't speak it aloud, not yet, but something old and familiar tightened between them, something neither time nor distance had truly broken. Lily leaned her head against him again. Can we go home now? Elias nodded. Yeah, let's go. They stood together. Mara reached for Lily's hand, and Lily grabbed both of theirs. The three of them walked toward the parking lot, the courthouse behind them buzzing with the aftermath of everything they had revealed. About failure, about arrogance, about quiet strength that had waited too long in the shadows. Before they reached the car, a reporter jogged toward them. Sir, can you give a statement? People are calling you a hero. Elias paused only long enough to answer softly. I just fixed what needed fixing. And he kept walking, because that was who he was. And now the whole courthouse knew it. And Karen Drummond, stripped of influence, stripped of ego, stripped of her imagined superiority, was no longer the center of any story. Elias was. Subscribe and don't miss our next story. Karen told the nurses, I was a drug addict to keep me from my wife's C-section. The judge sentenced her for felony interference. Trust me, you'll feel it. And tell me in the comments, what injustice should we tackle next?